Pirelli are entering their 12th straight year as the sole tyre supplier in this phase of their involvement in Formula 1. With it, they also enter their fourth significant set of technical regulations, something they've been heavily preparing for. But I've long been interested in what feels like the rather unenviable position Pirelli have volunteered itself for, showcasing tyres that deliberately degrade. Tyres that annoy their drivers, tyres that force something of a compromise between flat-out racing and managing the fastest overall race. Tyres are now very much front and centre across much of the Formula 1 weekend, not just something you strap on the car and forget about. How they behave, how they wear, how much they can be pushed is the biggest part of the Grand Prix strategy. And all this is by design. It's what Formula 1 wants from its tyres. So I spoke to Mario Rizzola, Pirelli's head of motorsport, to talk about the challenges of meeting these requirements and dealing with how the tyres are perceived by the drivers and by the audience, starting with getting the tender and starting out in 2011.
And the first request was a bit strange because Formula 1 needed something to give more excitement to the races, to increase the number of overtaking, and so one idea was to have tires with high degradation. That obviously is exactly the opposite we have done for so many years. Mm-hmm. When you develop new tires, you try to reduce degradation, you try to increase the performance. So there are many targets that are exactly opposite of what they were looking for. But we accepted the challenge anyway. We thought that it was a good way to promote also our image in the championship, explaining to spectators what was going on.
Formula 1 shifted to more of a focus on tyres starting in 2007 when they introduced the rule forcing teams to use both a soft and a hard compound of tyre in the race. And by the time Pirelli took over as supplier in 2011, they were asked to make the tyre strategy a more powerful tool, and so it has remained ever since. Now, to achieve this, you have to introduce serious and noticeable degradation to the tyres. If you don't, they'll just run flat out on one set of tyres for basically the whole race. But if you wear out your tyres, you have to have more pit stops, which is a significant chunk of time out of your race. So drivers hold back performance to make their tyres last to try and take fewer pit stops. So what we end up seeing is drivers not able to push as fast as they want, which annoys drivers and fans. So how do you balance all of these elements?
Yeah, I don't want to say it's an impossible task because nothing is impossible, but you are right. When you reduce degradation, clearly you go in a direction where you can imagine less strategies or a reduction in number of pit stops. It's wrong to eliminate the degradation because, as you said, if you don't have degradation, you don't have strategies. So we need to manage the degradation in a way that can encourage to have a mix of one-stop and two-stop strategies. This is what is, let's say, written in the target letter, and the values that are in the target letters are coming from simulations where a mix of one and two-stop strategies are possible.
The target letter he mentions is an agreement between stakeholders, F1, the FIA, teams, and so on what the performance and characteristics of the 2022 tyre should be. They aim for less overtaking, a wider working temperature range, and lower degradation.
That means that the two-stop strategy should be quicker than the one-stop, because you need to have an advantage of a few seconds to take the risk that if you are on a two-stop strategy, you are back in traffic and maybe you lose some time. So you need to have an advantage on a two-stop strategy compared to one-stop. Then you have the choice to have a more aggressive approach with two stops, taking the risk that maybe you make a mistake during a pit stop or you get in traffic and so you lose a bit of time. Or you can approach the race on a more conservative choice that is a one-stop.
So the overall idea is to encourage more two-stop strategies by making it inarguably the faster strategy, less marginal with the one-stop option. The risk you have to factor in is making the two-stop work with getting past cars and the added risk of not mucking up a pit stop twice. But Mario is right, you need to have degradation as a fundamental part of the tyre in order to force multiple stops. The soft tyre may be far and away the fastest, but if it doesn't run out quickly, teams will make it work for a one-stop if they can. But also we don't want too much tyre management, or what happens is we see the best drivers in the world tiptoeing around instead of pushing for all they're worth. And actually, if the new 2022 aero rules actually deliver on their target, that may go a long way to solving the problem.
Let's see what is going to happen. The main discussion was on overheating. That obviously is something we want to avoid and to reduce, and working range of the compounds. Overheating is not just a matter of how the tires operate. It was also the old F1 concept, the old F1 cars. They were generating downforce mainly from the wings, and that means that the turbulence that they generate were affecting the cars in the back. And the cars were losing up to 40% of downforce when they were following closely another car. If you lose downforce, you start sliding. If you slide, you overheat the tire. So as you can see, it's a never-ending story. Now with the new concept, they lose up to 10% of downforce when they follow closely the car in front. That means they still keep a lot of downforce on the car. They push the tires on the ground, on track. They don't slide. And this together with the new concept, the new idea that we had to design the compounds should encourage close racing. That is the idea behind this new concept of Formula One.
Now, naturally, drivers are always going to complain about the tyres. Drivers and teams want a perfect car with perfect tyres, and they will try and minimise the hard work they have to do. And tyres degrading after 15 laps is going to annoy them, naturally. So just how seriously do Pirelli have to take drivers moaning and complaining about how tyres behave? And how much do the teams just need to accept what they're given and make it work?
I believe we have to talk about two different elements. One is the feedback from the drivers. You said complaining, yeah, probably you are right, but I would say that they are giving us feedback in order to improve the product further. That's the important part of the complaints that we have to take on board, because when they are coming to us and giving us feedback that could be also a negative one or a negative on some specific elements, that's important for us to design a tire that is even better. The other element is about how we have to design a tire, because we should remember that we design the same product for everybody. That means 10 different cars and 20 different drivers. It is clear that each driver would like to have a tire that is designed for himself, that is optimized on his car. That is part of the competition. They want to have the quickest possible package, that is car, power unit, and tires. So it's in their wish list, but unfortunately, when you are the sole supplier, you have to design the best compromise. And that's why we are also running tests with all the cars, all the teams, not just the quickest, but also the midfield, also the slowest, because we needed to understand if our tires, the warm-up, the degradation, the performance, is okay for everybody, not just for the top teams. And that's why I'm saying we designed a tire that is the best compromise and is not optimized on a single car or driver.
The balance in all of this is tricky too, because it's not just about what the drivers or the teams want. Let's be honest, the teams want as easy a ride as possible. But the fans and the hosts, they want a show.
The point is that if you talk to different stakeholders, they have different ideas and they want something different. So it is clear that for the drivers, it's important that you have a tire that is with a maximum level of grip, no degradation, no overheating, and they want to push from lap 1 to the end to the checkered flag. But it's not always possible. But for the promoter, for example, that is not really good, because if you have a train of cars that cannot overtake, it's not funny. It's not something that spectators want to see. When we talk about degradation, when you have a high degradation, you create a differentiation between cars with fresh tires and cars with used tires. When you have very low degradation, you reduce this differentiation, but it's not just the car that is trying to attack that has tires with low degradation. It's also the car in front that has tires with low degradation. So they both have the same product, and sometimes it's difficult to overtake because of this small gap between the performance of two different type of tires. So we have to keep in mind that degradation, high or low, is the same for everybody. If you have high degradation, you can play with the strategy in order to have fresh tires when your competitor has old tires. If you have low degradation, it's a different story. The risk is that you reduce the number of overtaking maneuvers.
Being the sole tyre supplier to Formula One is something of a poisoned chalice. If everything goes well, you just sort of become invisible. But if something goes wrong, or things like degradation start annoying drivers, then you just get all of the criticism. So how do Pirelli feel they are perceived in this heat of the kitchen?
We made some analysis and investigation on the perception of our product on the market, and I think that it's a very good perception. It's a product with a high level of technology. Actually, we developed technology in Formula One to bring technology in our road tires for supercars mainly. Then it is important to explain to Formula One fans and motorsport fans that we are in control of the design of the tire. That's the message. So we can design a tire with degradation, or we can reduce degradation, or we can increase the delta lap time between compounds, or we can move the tire on a more monsoon tire or more towards the intermediate tire. These are our tools, and we can design tires according to what we are asked for.
And that makes a lot of sense. As long as people understand that Pirelli are doing what they're asked to do, that can be a positive. You want endurance tyres? We can make them. You want tyres that degrade? We'll give you those. You want tyres that only work in a small temperature window? No problem. That's what they hope people see, that they are rising to a specific engineering challenge, not that they only make tyres that fall apart. And Pirelli have to do this while the car changes above them. 2014 brought in increased levels of torque that the tyres had to manage. 2017 introduced wider tyres and massively increased aero that upped lap speeds by 5 seconds. And now 2022 is bringing even faster cornering speeds with the new ground effect cars, while asking Pirelli to completely change the shape of their tyres again.
In 2016, we had another big challenge because we had to develop the wider tyres for 2017. At that time, it was impossible to have a new car, a 2017 car with the level of performance that was expected in 2017. We are talking about 5-second quicker lap times in Barcelona compared to 2 years earlier compared to 2015. So it was a big challenge. We had to develop and to use a lot the virtual models, and we work with the teams in order to simulate as much as possible before running the tires on track. And we were using the mule cars, but with a level of performance that was much lower compared to what we had in 2017. Now there is another big challenge. It's not only the new cars, new aero package, new way to develop downforce, but also new size of the tires, 18 inches, complete new situation. We had to redesign the profile, we had to redesign the construction, but also the targets that are required to the new tires are completely different. Now we have to design tires with lower degradation, with less overheating, with a wider working range. So it was not just designing a new profile and construction, but also to redesign completely the family of compounds.
What's interesting is that research and development for the 2017 season was much harder for Pirelli than it has been for 2022. They just didn't have mule cars able to simulate a 5-second jump in performance. Whereas for 2022, they could work with the teams to balance and set up existing cars to at least get close to the expected performance. But the work has to continue.
The first step, as I said, was to design the profile and the construction in order to optimize the pressure distribution and temperature distribution under the footprint. That's really important because otherwise you can design any compound, but if the footprint is not working well, then you basically you throw in the bin all the improvement of the compounds. So the first step was exactly this one. We have a plan also for 2022 to develop the tires further, because sure in 2021 it was impossible to test the wheel cover, for example. It was impossible to test the new aero package. It was impossible to test the heat transfer between the brake and the rim, because the brakes were the old brakes. And so we have some question marks and we have some elements that we still need to confirm. Mule cars were working well because the minimum weight and weight balance was similar to the current cars, and the teams were putting a lot of effort in modifying all the cars in order to replicate what is expected for 2022. But now and this year we have the opportunity to test with the real cars, let's say with the current cars, and this is giving us a lot more information.
And just what have Pirelli learned so far about the new package and how these new lower sidewall tyres operate?
Yeah. The other point was about the characteristics, as you said, that are different, because with the lower sidewall, the tires are more precise, the tires are more reactive, especially the front. The comments from drivers were that the rear tire is very strong and straight line traction is quite good, so they can feel it. But the tires are different. In Abu Dhabi, for example, they were complaining about understeer because of the rear tire that was pushing too much the front. That was a useful information for them and for the teams in order to design the new cars, or not to design because they were already designed, but to rebalance the new cars in order to keep this in mind. In fact, in Barcelona, this understeer was highly reduced. There is another point, that is the behavior of the tire together with the new aero package. The new aero package is working a lot on the high-speed corners. So in high speed, with the new 18-inch tires, the cars were quite well balanced and drivers had confidence to push, especially in high speed. In low-speed corners, the ground effect is less, and so they were complaining, they were reporting some understeer on low-speed corners. So probably for them, it will be necessary to change a little bit the driving style in order to manage this slow-speed corner understeer compared to the high speed. I believe that the current Formula One are probably the fastest car in the history of Formula One, because if you compare the speed with the weight, and the weight is an element that is really important for the lap time, these cars are really quick. And also looking at the only test we have run so far with the 2022 cars, they are already quite quick. The expectations were that the cars were a lot slower compared to what they are in reality. And during the test, we are well aware of the fact they are hiding the real performance. So probably there is a lot more that is coming in the next few weeks.
So Pirelli have been working hard behind the scenes for the last 12 years, trying to walk a tightrope of various targets: degradation, stability, strategy, performance, working temperature ranges, and so on. Now perhaps they've not always succeeded to what we've wanted or even what they've targeted at times, but hopefully this has given a little insight into some of the complexities involved in delivering just what they've been asked. 2022 might not see the return of a plethora of two-stop races, as we've still got to see how these cars behave and race in action. But as the data is gathered and Pirelli continue to learn, we should see things moving in interesting directions.